We started this series last week on relationships, and that was all kinds of relationships that we're talking about. Yes, romantic relationships, but also your relationships with your coworkers, with the rest of your family. And we're going to talk this morning about one thing that I think is probably of utmost importance to a lot of us as we go through the series, and it's the ways we fight. Because I think we can all relate to that. We all argue, fight, go into conflict at some point or another. If you say, oh no, I never fight, well then you probably are fighting, it's just a little more subversive. We'll talk about that. Now we've all said and done some things to hurt each other. And sometimes we can say things to each other that we did not mean to be hurtful, it's just the way it comes across. Now, something new for my family and I has been having snow in the winter. We are just not used to that. We had so much snow in the winter, and we weren't used to it, but from having a few days off of school and to having 2-hour delays, we got kind of used to it. To the point where when we had our last big snow flurry, and there was a little bit of snow coming around, my oldest daughter, Lily Rose, is getting ready that morning. And I'm fully dressed and ready to go. And she says, Daddy, is it a 2-hour delay? I said, no, honey, there's no kind of delay this morning. You got to get ready and get going. And I kid you not, she looks me up and down and says, you look like that's a 2-hour delay. Should I change clothes? I don't know. Sometimes we say stuff to each other, and it wasn't an intentional dig. It was a pretty good one. Daddy got burnt. So, after I picked up my jaw off the ground, I realized it was pretty funny. But we're going to talk this morning about things that we do to intentionally jab at somebody, to intentionally get to somebody. Have you ever heard of a spite house? How many people have ever heard of a spite house? You're in for a treat. Well, a spite house is defined as a house or an addition to a house that has been purposely constructed to annoy somebody, usually a neighbor. Let's look at our first example. So this is in Kensington, London. A woman had some renovation plans, and her neighbors would not approve those renovation plans, so she did this to her house, and they'd have to look at it. And I want you to notice, in the upper right-hand corner, the candy cane stripe doesn't quite make it to the top, which if you're OCD, will bother you every day that you look at it. And our next one, this house is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This was where a man wanted to sell a small part of land, a very small parcel of land, to his neighbor. But his neighbor refused. So despite him, he built this little tiny house, and ironically, it is now occupied by an interior decorator. And my favorite one, our third example, is this house. This is my favorite of these stories. You see, the story goes that in 1925, a woman agreed to divorce her husband, who was a lawyer, under the condition that he would build a house for her just like the one they used to live in when they were married. Now, her lawyer was not very thorough, but her husband that she was divorcing, who was a lawyer, was very thorough. Yeah, I'll build her a house. But she didn't say where. So he built it on the marshlands with no running water, only salt around it, salt water. The house also, if you were to go inside of it, is full of radon, it's full of asbestos. So this house is toxic like their old house was, but in different ways. Folks, when we hold on to bitterness, it destroys us as much as it does the other person. When we learn to forgive, we let go of our perceived rights to get even, to collect on a debt. We let go of the toxicity that's inside of us that will eat away at us as well. It's probably harming us more than it's harming them. I want us to take a look at Galatians 5, 13 through 15, and this is in the AMP translation on the inside of your notes because it's going to give a literal translation and expand and define some of the words and phrases for us. Starting in verse 13. For you, my brothers, We're called to freedom. Only do not let your freedom become an opportunity for the sinful nature, worldliness, selfishness, but through love serve and seek the best for one another. For the whole law concerning human relationships is filled in one precept. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That is, you shall have an unselfish concern for others and do things for their benefit. But if you bite and devour one another in bickering and strife, watch out that you, along with your entire fellowship, are not consumed by one another. Now, how many of us here today can attest that you've been in an argument with somebody, you've been in a conflict with somebody, and it's like two snakes eating each other at the tail. It's just a vicious circle. Nobody wins. You end up feeling lousy. There is no clear winner at the end. Now, we as human beings, one of the things that separates us from the animals is our verbal communication. And yet, we have these words. Have you ever heard someone in the midst of a conflict growl? You ever heard that? I've heard some of that before. That's a little disturbing. You hear somebody growl, or we huff and we puff and we roll, we snarl up our lip like a dog about to pounce. As Galatians says, we bite at each other. We devour each other. Jesus puts it this way in Luke 6, starting with verse 45. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Also, we read in Matthew 15:11, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of their mouth, that is what defiles them. So what is in your heart is what comes out of your mouth. Sometimes we say something nasty in a conflict. We say, I didn't mean that. When more accurately, I meant it, I just didn't mean it to come out. There is an old poem that's been ascribed to a lot of different people, and one of the people it's been ascribed to is the creator of Milo Supermarkets, Frank Outlaw. And the poem goes like this. Watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny. In James chapter 3, verses 4 through 6, it says, take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. Now, I want you to notice in particular, one part here is it relates to your relationships, and that is that the tongue can steer the course of your life. Now, can you relate to that? Can you think of times in your life where your tongue, your mouth, has got you in trouble? I think we probably all can relate to, right? Have you ever, when you were growing up, did your tongue ever get you in trouble with your parents? Did it ever get you in trouble at school? What about at work? Your mouth ever got you in trouble there? What about with your romantic interest? Have you ever said things to your kids that you walked away, you maybe kept this stern face and you walked away and go, ooh, that was a little harsh. That was a little bit too much. Clearly, how we communicate with each other matters. So what can we do? The first thing is, there is no good relationship without communication. If you're writing these down, and this is probably already in your notes, there is no good relationship without communication. And I get it. The popular adage is that women speak 13,000 words a day, and men speak about 7,000 words a day. So one way I like to think about that is, men are like one of those little cards you buy with phone minutes on it. You have a calling plan. And women are like an international, long-distance, unlimited calling plan. and I discovered this myself when I got married. I was surprised. Here we go. What I found is that we'd be laying in bed, and we're talking at the end of the day. and I've used up all my minutes. And I've turned off my phone, my internal phone. And so we'd talk about something, and there would be a lull in the conversation. And I, as a guy, with all my minutes are gone, she knows what I'm going to say. As a guy with all my minutes used up, there'd be a lull in the conversation, and I'd go to sleep. And like 15, 20 minutes, maybe an hour would pass, and Brooke would pick back up because she still has more to say. Her minutes aren't used up. And I'm dead asleep, and it's silent. And I just hear her speaking, and I panic. I would jump up. Is somebody breaking into the house? Is the house on fire? Because there must be an emergency because we've dipped into next day's allotment of minutes. So I would panic, and she got wise to this. And we were first married. When she got her first smartphone, she turned on a sound on her smartphone that could only be described as the alarm sound of like a nuclear meltdown. And she said this for about 2 o'clock in the morning, and it goes off about 2 o'clock in the morning. I jump up. What's going on? I turn around, and Brooke is laying in bed, killing herself laughing. She got it. I wasn't even mad. That was pretty good. I was impressed. So I got to say that was pretty funny. And I would far rather have a woman who wants to talk to me and wants to communicate with me than someone who doesn't. Back in grad school, I dated this one girl who, if things were really serious, we talked about marriage. It's not the other girl I shared a story with y'all about. I know I got a lot of bad stories. But there was this one girl, before Brooke, I dated, and it seemed like I thought the perfect relationship. And by that I meant that we never fought. And I had this group of people that I met with every week. We had IPR, which stands for Interpersonal Relationships. And we would talk with all these ministers, and we would share our most personal struggles. And I shared with them, I said, there's this girl, I think it's really serious. She might be the one, but I'm a little concerned because we've never fought. These other ministers, these mentors of mine, kind of laughed and said, what are you talking about, man? You got it made. You never fight. I said, no, you don't understand. If we're going to get married, I need enough house fights. I don't want to pick a fight. But it's important for me to know how we fight, and we never fought. And then this girl that we had all this romantic time together, and I thought she was the one, she broke up with me one day over email. I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea. Years passed before I kind of put it together. I'm like, I kind of think I know. But there was no communication. And it's hard to fix a problem if you don't know what the problem is, if there's no communication in the relationship. So you might think you've got the perfect relationship. I thought I had the perfect relationship. What I didn't realize is that the fuse had been lit and the bomb was about to go off. I didn't even know the fuse had been lit. So it's far better to have someone who will communicate with you. It is important how we communicate with each other on those little things every single day. That's at least as important on how we communicate about the big milestones. I say, as long as I communicate on the big ones, no, it's the everyday little things that matter too. So number 2, it is important how we communicate. We said it's important that we communicate. It is important how we communicate. How would you like to have a written transcript of one of your arguments with somebody? Oh, that would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? Would you look at that and say, when did I say that? That doesn't sound like me. No, I can't believe I said that. That's not me. Well, there was this old episode of a sitcom called King of Queens. And that couple, Doug and Carrie, they're having a fight in front of her laptop. And she's been using it for work, and she's got this voice dictation software on it. And it's typing up everything that she says. And so in this clip we're about to show you, here is the transcript of what they found.
My computer was on, and that new program transcribed our entire fight. All 2 hours of it. Like here, where I said, didn't you notice the bag was too light? And you said, you have no friends.
Yeah, but then you said, at least I'm not a massive failure, so you really answered the bell.
Now, come on, it isn't funny. I mean, look, here's where we threatened to run each other over with our cars.
And now we're having Fruit Loops together. It's a storybook ending. Come here, baby.
No.
I think most of us would be horrified to find out that there was some written record of the nasty things that we said to each other in a fight. But there are some things that we can change. There's some strategies that we can use in our conflicts. First off, we can stick to the facts. That left hook of, you have no friends, that was uncalled for. That didn't really have anything to do with the facts. But sometimes in an argument we get emotional. We jump to conclusions. We try to mind read. We try to ascribe. I know what your motives are behind what you did. I know what you were thinking. We try to play mind readers, and we try to jump to conclusions. We don't stick to the facts. Sometimes we get into name calling and everything else. Secondly, we can stay on topic. Now, I don't care what you may have studied in vocational school, college, on-the-job training, whatever your major may have been. Sometimes, some of us, when we get married, we become history majors. Now, when I got married, I became a history major, a political science major, and a law major. I don't know where I thought I got these degrees from, but I would go into an argument prepared to win at all costs. I was like a TV attorney on like a really bad TV attorney. I would build a case, proof upon proof, that I was right. And again, I was prepared to fight dirty if that would help me. So I would come into the argument with Exhibit A. If the court would please turn their attention to Exhibit A. You said that you wanted, you said that you wanted this restaurant at 6:20 on May 2nd. And when really I think you wanted this other restaurant. You said you don't like the new restaurant, but now you want to eat at the new restaurant. I found a discrepancy. I gotcha. I'd lay out my evidence. I would state my case. I'd stand back pretty proud of myself. I won. I had leveled my opponent. And then I found out real early, after I had done this, I built this big legal case and everything, and I stood back very proud of myself. And then my wife started crying. I had been so hateful towards her, and she started crying. I said, this isn't what winning's supposed to feel like. That's not, I feel like a monster. I don't feel like I won anything. I was so concerned with giving her a piece of my mind instead of a piece of my heart. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. I was harboring in my heart the need to be right. And that cockiness came out of my mouth. It was biting. It was devouring. It wasn't godly. We read that the tongue is like a fire. And Proverbs 12:18 says, the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Now, I'd like to think anyway that at this point in my marriage, I'm not quite the legal professor I thought I was at this point, but I by no means claim to have whipped this. I'm still learning by God's help to try to sheathe that sword, to put away the flipboard, to try to speak peace and healing. It's hard to put away that sword. Maybe you can relate. Maybe you say things in an argument and you say, oh, but I already have this thing. No, maybe that's not the right thing. Oh, but I've already got this attack. Well, this left hook. No. I understand if there's anybody in here that can relate and say, but I want to say this, I want to say that. It's hard to sheath that sword. I can relate. I get it. Old habits die hard, but it's worth it. Another thing that we can work on in the ways that we fight is to handle conflict immediately. Some of the worst things that you could ever hear, and that maybe some of you have been here, you've had this said to you, maybe by a spouse or maybe by a coworker. In any case, it's bad to hear. We need to talk, but not now. We're going to wait till the end of the day. We're going to wait till the next week, the next day, the next week. And you know that your boss or another employee or somebody in your family wants to talk, and you go, what could it be about? I don't know. And it can eat away at you. And somebody might use that as just a method of psychological warfare, suspense, but sometimes I think it's just an innocent thing that, well, I was busy, I wanted to let you know I need to talk to you, but we'll figure out when. But sometimes it's hard to make time. But if at all you can make time, make the time to reconcile things immediately. If it doesn't have to wait, don't make it wait. In Ephesians 4:26 it says, in your anger do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. In Matthew 5, starting with verse 23, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. Now, looking at these passages, we see that we are called to be reconciled immediately, not to wait until tomorrow. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. And we're not even supposed to wait until after church. We have this image in Matthew 5 that's, remember, this was animal sacrifices. You would come forward, you would come up to the altar, and you're standing in line with other people, and you're waiting your turn in line, and you've got your animal sacrifice on the leash, you're bringing them in to be sacrificed. And you're standing there in line, you're waiting your turn, you're going to say the prayer, you're going to sacrifice this before the priest, be reconciled to God. And God says, but while you're waiting in line, you look over here and you see your brother or your sister who you've got some kind of conflict with. Tie the animal up so he doesn't run off, and then you go and be reconciled to them. It goes against what you would think. You think, well, I've got to be reconciled to God first. I want to make God happy. God says, you know, the reconciliation I want to see right now, you know what would make me happy? Go and be reconciled to your brother. Go and be reconciled to your sister before you do anything else. Oh, but I've got to make this offering. That's important. Yeah, that's important. But the offering of your heart towards your brother and sister, lay it down at that altar. That's what I want to see happen. Go and be reconciled to your brother and sister, and then go and make your sacrifice at the altar. Reconciliation cannot wait. In 1 Corinthians 7, 4 through 6, it indicates that in the case of a marriage, a man and woman should not distance themselves from each other except for to pray and then to come back together. That sometimes we want to walk away from the problem. The scripture says if you want to walk away from the problem, you want to walk away from the conflict, let it be because you're going to walk over here and go on your knees and pray. And you're going to come back together and you're going to pray. That's the kind of, if you're going to have some distance, let it be because you walk to the other side of the bedroom and you're going to get down on your knees and pray. Now let me give you another exercise. And this is something that you can use when you're in the midst of a conflict. If you are going to be physically separated from that person for a while that you're in a conflict with, this is a tool that you can use. And it's a tool that I have used before in conflict, and I bet some of you have used this too. Write a letter. Now I know times have changed and handwriting a letter might be a little bit different now. Maybe you type this on the computer, maybe it's an email. Nowadays it's text messaging. But sometimes sitting down and writing out your thoughts can be helpful. And I know some people, you might not want to admit this, some people may have used this for work. You hear this story all the time. Somebody sits down and they write down their resignation letter, and then they delete it. They crumple it up, throw it in the trash can. But even in families, you might say, I've done that with my family. I wanted to resign from this person in my family, but I didn't. I wanted to resign from this relationship. I wanted to say, I don't want to be friends with this person anymore, but I didn't send that letter. Sometimes you'll sit down and you'll write something, and I'm a habitual proofreader. I don't know about you. I'll habitually proofread before I send out something. Well, I'll write down something, and I'll look back over it and go, ooh, why did I write that? That was nasty. And I'll go to my altar and I'll change it. Why did I say this? I know what I meant there, but that's not the way it came across. And I go and I'll change it. So if you think that in an argument, you are an impulsive person in an argument, you say something and go, ooh, I wish I could take that back. Sometimes when you write it down and you look over it, you can kind of narrow down to what you're really trying to say, focusing on the facts, not getting historical, not making things up, but just say, this is what happened, this is how I feel about it. Here's a way going forward. Honestly, conversation one-on-one is the best, but sometimes, as a strategy, writing something down can be a good strategy for you in the midst of a conflict. And by the way, this is a good way to pray. And I know it sounds unusual. You might say, I just know to pray on my knees with my eyes closed before God, and I know He hears my thoughts. Yes, that's true. Maybe I say them out loud, and I know He hears it. Yes, that's true. But sometimes we get into a habit with our prayer life where we just say the same thing over and over again, just this robotic response. We just blah, 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 and then we're done, and we kind of hang up the spiritual phone on God. Sometimes, if you want to slow down and really think about what you're saying before God, if you write out your prayer. And I've seen some prayers like that, where, and I've done that before, where you can write them in a journal, you can do whatever, as long as you write that down. You might crinkle it up because it's personal and you don't want someone to see it, fine. But sitting down and writing that down sometimes is a good way to slow yourself down and think about it and look back over and say, I didn't really even realize I was struggling with that, but I prayed for that thing a lot. Maybe I need to go to God about that again. Maybe I need to follow up with this. So it's a good strategy to use in your prayer life as well. There's this great quote, maybe you've heard it. We teach people how to treat us. And typically when we hear that quote, we teach people how to treat us, you typically think of that in a response mode. Someone says something to me and how I respond will teach them how to treat me in the future. That can be true, but it's at least as true on the other side of it. How I speak to people will teach them how to speak to me. if I'm sowing the seeds of loving kindness, I might just get the seeds back of loving kindness myself. See, if you want an apple tree, what do? You plant apple seeds. But sometimes we plant poison ivy, we come back later and expect to get an apple. And it doesn't work that way. At some point, you've brandished your weapons. You pulled your weapons out in a conversation. You unsheathed the sword. You've used those words. And when you use those words, that language, that behavior towards somebody else, don't be surprised if now they have their weapons drawn. And again, you might say, well, I'm not a confrontational person. I don't say things to the other person. I just let them know I could. I might say one or two things just to let them know I've got the nuclear warheads on reserve, but then I don't ever use them. You know what that sounds like? It sounds like a Cold War. And I wonder how many of you have ever been in a Cold War with somebody else, where you have those weapons of mass destruction, and they have their weapons of mass destruction, and no side is firing at the other, but in a sense you are. You're firing shots at the other person, but just in more passive-aggressive ways. Silence is deadly, silence kills, and silence speaks and screams volumes. And I want to take a moment to dispel a myth. And if I step on your toes, I'm sorry. If this works for you, and you say, Pastor Travis, you don't know what you're talking about, I'm sorry, but before I got married, I had countless men tell me this one piece of advice. I bet you could complete it before I ever said it. Countless people told me, when you're in a conflict with your wife, just say, yes, dear. I heard it all my life. Just say, yes, dear. That's what you're supposed to do, and it's supposed to just to immediately stop any kind of conflict. Just say, yes, dear. And I tried it, and it didn't work for me. See, Brooke and I would have a difference of opinion on something, and I don't really like conflict. So I would say, yes, dear, because I thought, oh, that would shut her up. I would just say, yes, dear. And would you believe she's too smart for that? She saw right through my games. And she'd say, oh, no, don't you do that to me. Don't you be fake with me. I want to know what you really think. And I wished I could have lined up all the men who had ever given me this bad advice and turned back to them and said, you didn't prepare me for this. She's too smart for it. What do I do now? She actually wants to know my opinion. That didn't work for me. And I would submit to you that maybe that's your card at husbands, that you might have that card that you play and say, oh, I just say yes, dear, and it just silences her, and it just works every time. And she's fine with it. I would submit to you that maybe not. Maybe, because I don't think my wife is the only person who likes communication in a marriage. I think maybe it's worth asking the question, am I just saying this to shut her up, and she would rather I communicate? And see, I learned an interesting thing happened. First of all, we both have degrees in helping professions, psychology, sociology. She's an expert on behavior. She works in behaviors all day. So why I thought I could pull that trick over on her, I don't know. When two people with helping professions get married, she knows why it's important to communicate, and she knows I know how to do it, and I can't play dumb. I tried to play dumb. All I have left, hon, is grunts. I've used up all my minutes, and I can't communicate. Oh no, she knew better. She saw through my little games. See, yes, dear, is not merely a concession if you're using it to silence your wife. And again, that didn't work for me. Sometimes, and I learned this was interesting, sometimes we would talk about this plan that she had. Instead of saying, yes, dear, we would talk about it. And I find, okay, I agree with what she said. Now we've talked about it. I agree with what she's saying. Instead of just shutting down. Sometimes I might have some information she does not have. And we would talk about it. And we would collaborate. And we would come out with something that we both liked. I say, well, that's a lot better than me just shutting up. What I could do, I could just say yes, dear. And I could not say anything. And I don't really like this thing that we're doing. And I could just not say anything. I could just let it stew, and I could let it fester, and then randomly, in some kind of conversation, because I've lit the fuse way back here, I don't like this thing that I said yes, dear, to. I'm just going to explode later in the midst of a conflict. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? Yeah. Found out that we were going to talk. We were going to have that conversation, but it was good that we did. Again, like I said, I'd rather have a woman that wants to talk to me than one that doesn't. 2 Corinthians 5:20 says that we are to be ambassadors for Christ. Now, back in ancient times, a king would have his kingdom, and his kingdom would stretch far and wide. And if you lived in the epicenter of the city, inside the walls, then you might see the king on a routine basis. And if you see the king on a routine basis, it is a reminder of whose you are. You're under the authority of the king. If you look out your window in the morning and the procession is coming for the king, you're reminded, yes, I belong to this, I'm a subject of this king over here. But what about the far reaches of the kingdom, where the king has conquered lands? What about way out here where they don't see the king routinely? What do? How do this people remember we are subjugated to the king, we're under this king's authority? Well, what the king would do is he would commission sculptors to go out and he would build statues in certain places, statues in his image, so that people would look at this statue in his image and remember whose kingdom this is. And way back in Genesis, God creates us in his image. And we as Christians who have that light within us should be like those statues. We're made in the image of God. We are showing his light. And when people look at us, they might remember whose we are, that we belong to the king, that this is his land. So in 2 Corinthians 5:20, it says, as ambassadors of Jesus Christ, we need to be reconciled to God. And it makes sense, doesn't it? If you're going to be an ambassador of somebody, you've got to have a relationship with that person. You can't be at war with the king and say, I'm an ambassador for the king. I represent the king, but I don't like him, have a relationship with him, or ever talk to him. If you're an ambassador for the king, you've got to be reconciled to God. And when we're reconciled to God, through that growing relationship with Jesus Christ, change is going to happen from the inside out. You might say, I need to change this. Okay, I see I need to change this about myself. I need to change this about myself. How's that going to happen? Well, if you want the kind of change that God can bring, you need that relationship with God. If you want to go into your conflict with your spouse, your coworker, or family member, your friends, and speak as an ambassador of Jesus Christ, you've got to have that relationship with Jesus Christ. And if you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, this morning, I hope that you will come to know Jesus today. I would love to speak with you about that relationship with Jesus Christ. I'd love to pray with you. I'd love to introduce you to Jesus this morning. If you would like for me to pray over your relationships, we can do that. If you and a person you're in a conflict with want to come to the office sometime this week and we talk about it, I would love to speak with you about that. I know sometimes people will say, I don't want to bother the pastor. I know he's at home. It's dinner time, whatever. I don't want to bother him. No, that's what I'm here for. You're never bothering me. This is what I live for. As odd as it might sound, those phone calls at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I live for that. I love that. That's the best connection time. So never think that you're bothering me by calling me, day or night. If you say, I need just prayer over this relationship, somebody in my family I hadn't talked to for years, I'd love to pray with you this morning or anytime. My number one priority as a Christian, as a pastor, and our priority as the church even, is your relationship with God. That's the most important thing. We can have all kinds of programs and all kinds of stuff, but the most important thing at the end of the day is your relationship with God and your relationship with other people, where hopefully you're grabbing Jesus by one hand, you're grabbing them by the other hand, and you're connecting the two. And you're bringing in people to that relationship with Jesus Christ. That's the most important thing. So if you don't have that relationship with Jesus Christ, we need to get that right today. If your relationships with other people are disjointed, get that right today. Don't let it wait until tomorrow. We'd love to pray with you. If you don't have a church home, we'd love to have you here as a member of this church. Joining the church means that you identify with this group, that this is your family, that we are one big happy family that continuously accepts and loves people and brings them in. And we learn to love each other better as we love God better. So I think we can all use some allies in this life who have been through some of the things that we have been through and can help us deal with our stuff more effectively if we'll just let other people help us. So however the Lord leads you, won't you please come forward as we sing this final song.